Hello, welcome to my channel. This video will hopefully be interesting and might be a talking point and might be able to give you some information you don't know already. This is based on my experience of the special needs journey, and I'll be doing more videos about special needs and autism and neurodiversity. So this video today is entitled, what should you do, or what can you do if you suspect your child might be autistic? So my story, I'll just give you a little bit about my story. My child was suspected to be autistic by a day nursery, although they couldn't say that he was, but they suspected that he might be when he was 10 months old. But it took until the age of nearly 4.5 to get a diagnosis of autism. And that's partly because the professionals obviously don't want to get it wrong. It can be quite difficult to diagnose before the age of 4, even if there's obvious factors, you know, like hand flapping and being non-verbal and not making any verbalizations, or making some verbalizations and then they disappear. So even if there seems to be some obvious traits, it can be quite tricky to diagnose, and it's not always, they don't like to diagnose too early. They like to, well, give the child a chance and see what happens. So for me, had to wait until he was nearly 4.5, 4.5. But there were signs quite early on, and by the age of 2, he was saying the odd word and then it disappeared. And there were other sort of things I observed, like hand flapping and not really wanting to get close to or interact with other children, and didn't make any eye contact whatsoever. But sometimes children and people can be autistic and make eye contact. So it can be quite it can be very complex, and it can be difficult to diagnose, and obviously people want to get things right. This might sound annoying, but one thing that can be good is making diary entries. And if you don't have time to write them down with a pencil or pen, sometimes even talking to a phone and saving it, or because you can do text to speech, that's quicker, or keeping videos. And another indicator is sleep disturbance. And again, a lot of children have sleep problems when they're young anyway. That's not necessarily a sign of autism, but it can be. So I would suggest keeping a sleep diary, and just diary generally of behaviour, sleep patterns and any concerns. And if you don't have time to do it every day, do it a few times a week. You don't have to do it, but the professionals do love diary entries, and they love people keeping diaries. It's because everything really works on an evidence-based system, if you like, really. So the more evidence you have, the more the path will become clear, and the more you can say, well, actually, look at this, I've got all this evidence. And sometimes children do get diagnosed before the age of 4. I've known a couple of people where they've been diagnosed at the age of 2, 2.5. That can happen. Depends which county you live in, depends on many things. I'd also recommend trying to get a blood test done to see if there's any chromosomal abnormalities, because we didn't think there would be, but there were. And they didn't even suggest doing a blood test until he was 4, and that's what really got the diagnosis. And really that blood test should have probably been done before that. If the professionals are still a bit unsure, certainly after the age of 4 or 5, they can do something called an ADOS assessment. And that's where professionals sit behind a screen and they give the child various tasks to do, and they make notes and observe. And it's an autism scaling system. It's an assessment to work out where that child falls within the scaling that fits an autism criteria, and therefore potentially a diagnosis. So there is something, ADOS, an ADOS assessment, but that's not always done, because sometimes diary entries and reports from various professionals are enough to clinch and get a diagnosis anyway. And sometimes people used to say to me, a diagnosis isn't important. It is, because it can answer lots of questions. It can potentially open the doorway to more funding. It can potentially get more professionals on side with you. It can open doors that maybe won't be opened if you don't have a diagnosis. I'm certainly not saying people should be obviously people aren't diagnosed unless they need to be. And I used to be, the irony is I used to be a bit anti-diagnosis myself, but things have changed, because when you find yourself in a situation where you really need the child to have one, and he's non-verbal level 3 ASD, so he definitely needs a diagnosis, and his blood test also showed that he's got chromosome abnormalities as well. That's why a blood test is actually really important as well, by the way. Most people won't show up as having abnormal chromosomes, but some will. And even though it's rare, it's worth trying to get that checked as well. And the other thing I was going to say is you don't need a diagnosis to get into a special school though, but you do need an EHCP plan, educational healthcare plan, which can be easier to get if you have a diagnosis. So it all gets a bit complex, but I would finish by saying, if you have any doubts, diary entries are good. Talking to people, especially talking to health visitors and your local doctor. In fact, I think the journey started as an amalgamation from day nursery showing a bit of concern, speaking to the health visitor and speaking to the GP, the general practitioner doctor. And the doctor keeps all the notes and keeps everything on file. So they are really the key points. So the way I got a referral to the paediatrician, audiologist and speech therapist by the age of 2 was through the GP, the doctor. And that's because the health visitor also wrote him a letter and suggested that was so. I was really liaising in particular with the health visitor and the local doctor. But it's important to take notes and keep diary entries when you can, just to keep a record. I know that probably sounds annoying, and I hate keeping diary entries. I hated all that, but I did it because it just made things a bit easier. So in the first instance, if you have any concerns, I would speak to a health visitor and I would speak to your local doctor. Those are really the first steps, and they can open the doors for you. Until next time, take care for now. Bye.